talk just a little bit about, not the process in terms of do you use a pen or do you write on a computer? That's also a popular question and not to me an interesting one. But the drive and the determination and the insistence of
Insistence is a good
all
word.
of that. Could we
Yes,
talk a
I
little bit?
talk a lot about this, especially with the two very good friends of mine here who are amazing writers. Marie Helene Bertino, who's in the front row here, who went to grad school with me at Brooklyn College. And by the way, if you haven't read her story collection, Safe as Houses, you're really missing out. And Laura Vandenberg, who I see in the back, who's another very good friend of mine, and also an amazing writer. And she has a new story collection coming out in the fall called The Isle of Youth. But I have talked to the two of them a lot about this, about how talent only gets you so far, and at some point it's about will. You just have to sort of decide you are going to do this and stop hemming and hawing. And I had been hemming and hawing for quite a while. I had, the idea for this book began as a short story in 2006 in Michael's workshop. The story was it was okay. It had moments, it was very satirical. It was a little bit one note. It had footnotes. Do you remember it? Footnotes? Sometimes I like footnotes. I have a Como streak, but so I knew it wanted to be a novel. I was starting to dig deeper into the emotional life of the character, and doing a lot of research about Samantha Smith and about 1980s nuclear, looking. Because of course I did live through the decade, but I watched The Day After again. I was doing all this research. Things were percolating, but the thing that was really stopping me is I didn't actually believe I could do it, and so I was any excuse to not do it. I was like, oh, it's true, I guess I can do it. So there were several years of I don't know what, a lot of false starts and a lot of pages I threw away, and the real problem is I just was doubting myself too much. And then, I don't know, a funny thing happened, the very end of 2011 turning into end of 2010 turning into 2011, I was upstate at my youngest sister's house for New Year's Eve, and there were some friends there, and we did this little thing where everyone wrote something on a little piece of paper, something they wanted to accomplish in the next year or make happen or something, and threw it into the fire. And I just decided then and there that my mantra for 2011 was make it happen. So I put that on a big sheet of paper over my desk in my apartment in Brooklyn. I don't live in Brooklyn anymore, but I lived in Brooklyn for a long time, and I miss it. And I put make it happen at the top, and I vowed that this book would be done by the end of December 2011. And it was, because I have this, and this is one thing that is a little bit autobiographical. I'm not giving away too much. I feel like a lot of this book is sort of this character kind of starting to realize her own strength and not underestimate herself, and kind of realize she has a strong will. And that's true of me too. Like I'm sort of my own worst enemy, but when I do decide to do something, and I really decide, then I do it. So, and I kept telling myself, well, Elliott, you ran a marathon, and when I started training for a marathon, I had never run more than 5 miles. So I was like, well, you've written short stories, and they're all not very long. They're maybe 20 pages, but it's like a marathon. You just do a little, build up mileage, and that's what I did. And Laura Vandenberg and I, who's in the back, we did this thing to encourage each other because she was also working on a book. We just created this structure for ourselves where every Sunday we would send each other 10 new pages, and we didn't even read them. It was like don't even open this is rough, but we just knew we created this deadline for ourselves.
That's great.
It was really great. It was like we cheered each other on, and now she's sold 2 books to FSG, and so it helps to have friends and cheerleaders. And this is again why your community and your peers are so important, because you're not just reading to each other, but there are a lot of moments of doubt and is this going to work? And I love having writer friends because they understand exactly how it feels to have these moments of like, oh.
When they give a shit that you're doing it.
Right, there's that. But also,
they actually agree that this is not just a fool's errand.
They know why you're sort of upset when a sentence is short. It's really funny because the last few months I was working on the book, or the last maybe 2 months, I was staying at my sister's house in Washington, D.C., and I have 3 nieces. At the time I had 2 nieces. The one who was now 6, who was 5 then, became very invested in the fact that I was writing this book. And I mean, I'm really close to her, but I was living kind of on their third floor, and I would come downstairs, and I remember one day, I guess I looked like I was in a good mood, and she said, you have to remember this kid was 5, maybe 4.5. She said, what's wrong? You don't like the words in your book today? And I was like, that's exactly it. And I said, no, I don't. And then she said, but can't you change them? She's so zen. She's a genius. But then another thing she said to me that was totally brilliant was, again, out of the blue, this kid is amazing. She looked at me and she said, but why do you have this lonely job? And I was like, oh, that is the $1 million question, because it is a lonely job. And then she also said, she's really funny, she, when she finally saw the finished books, she said, oh yeah, she saw the full manuscript. I had printed the whole thing out, I was lining it again, and she said, is that your book? And I said, yes, and she said, whew. If someone wants to read the whole thing, it's going to take them 4 days. Which is like really hilariously specific. I actually don't think it takes 4 days. It's a pretty quick read, just FYI. But
I was at a benefit in LA for this great group that does actual tutoring for elementary school kids who go to various schools where they don't really learn anything. And this one of the guys was teaching reading.
like 826.
Yeah.
Dave Eggers.
I had my class do blurbs for the books they read, and he read a few of them. This is my favorite. It said, "This is a very long book. When you flap the pages, it makes a really big wind." Which I want to use one day. This makes a very big wind, even though
my niece also asked me, I explained to her that I was going to be reading at Politics and Prose, which is the really great independent bookstore in Washington, and she goes there all the time to the kids section. So she said, why are you going to stand up and read it? Adults know how to read. Like, she just was like, it doesn't make any sense. Why would anyone go and see these people read a lot from a book? And I was like, you're kind of right.
She'll be lecturing here next week.
I know, she's trying, this kid is just, but anyway, of course, then she said, well, I want to come and I'll sit up there and help you sign the books. So she's going to be there.
You want to talk to our friends a little bit?
Yeah, if you guys have questions.
Please, anybody. That's part of why we're here, to talk to people who
Fashion questions.
would come here on a night when you can do anything in the whole world. Yes.
I have a question. I happen to remember the Samantha Smith story very well because I was obviously from Russia or Soviet Union at the time. And I spent a lot of time in this little place in the south of Russia called Artek, which is the camp for young communists. And Samantha Smith made a huge splash there in the 80s, and I was a little bit. Anyway, most of us here probably cannot imagine the legend she made for herself in the Soviet Union, because we were told that she is the representative of the American people, and the whole capitalist system is crumbling, and she is the way to the future. And if not for the little people in the White House, we would be one happy family tomorrow. And I wonder if that's reflected, if that image she was presented as on the other side of the fence is somehow reflected in the books.
Well, that
could everybody hear that?
Yes.
In the back?
That is such. I'm so glad you asked this question, because one of the things that I find really interesting about Samantha Smith is she is remembered, I think, more, with the exception of Maine, where everyone in her hometown remembers her, I think, but I think more people remember her in Russia than they do here. And that's partly because the Soviet Union released a postage stamp with her face on it in 1985. And the funny thing is, I knew that there was a postage stamp with her picture on it because I had done research and I found a picture of her on Wikipedia. I didn't actually have one, but I was like, oh, that's amazing. So I wrote this scene, the very opening of the book, the kind of prologue. The narrator finds, she's at this market called Izmailova in Moscow, which is a market that tourists are always going there, and you can, certainly in the 90s when I lived there, there was a lot of sort of kitschy Soviet things you could buy. So people were selling old KGB flasks, or KGB, as we'd say in Russian, and things like, and old Soviet stamps and that sort of thing. So I imagined that the narrator, it would be totally plausible for the narrator to find a stamp with her friend's picture. And in my book, the girl's name is Jennifer Jones. I named her that because it's just as alliterative and sort of all-American sounding as Samantha Smith. And so, I had her find this stamp. Then what's really hilarious is when I was done writing the book at the end of 2011, my youngest sister, who is a Russian literature scholar. She's about to defend her dissertation at Columbia. She had been in Moscow for most of 2011 doing dissertation research, and she went, when she came home for the holidays, she said, oh, I brought you a Christmas present from Russia, and I was like, okay, great, thanks. And she handed me this box, and I opened it up, and it was a Samantha Smith stamp. She had gone to Ismailova, just like the character does in the book, and found someone selling old Soviet stamps, and she found the Samantha Smith stamp. So in that sense, life actually imitated art. But I think that one of the things, coming back to your idea of how sort of, was she a kind of prototypical American? I think yes. I mean, I think part of what fascinated me at the time, as I said, she captured my imagination because I kind of identified with her. She seemed like a peer. When I grew up and started thinking about her again, and I found there was a book that Little Brown put out about her trip to the Soviet Union. What fascinated me about her is how kind of all-American she looks. I mean, it's almost like if you were going to, you know, central casting was going to sort of cast the kind of classic American girl. That's who she had, you know, long brown hair and blue eyes and dimples, and she just looks the part. You know, there were people who felt that she was kind of a Soviet pawn and had become sort of a propagandist for the Soviets because she came back saying, everyone's so friendly and they would never start a war, and gosh, Casey, you know, and it's like, well, of course. And meanwhile, you know, you have to remember this is the era when, like, Sting, that song Russians, do you guys remember that song? Where it's like, I mean, it seemed really profound to me at the time, but now I'm like, oh, the lyrics. But it, you know, it's like, how can I save my little boy from Oppenheimer's deadly toy? You know, it's like that. And the chorus was like, you know, but what might save us, me and you, is if the Russians love their children too. Like, please, as if they didn't love their children. But, you know, there was this sort of like, the Russians, do they even love their children? And then, you know, she came back and like, they do love their children. Their children are so much fun. I went to RTAC and I, you know, went to Pioneer Camp and wore a Pioneer uniform. And so anyway, there were certainly, I think some people were kind of suspicious about the way she was sort of used on both sides.
Well,
Does that answer your question? That's totally
I'm compelled to just quickly add that one of the many things that's so great and fascinating about this book is the way the Soviet culture at the time is so intricately about politics and consumerism and image and trying to get people to buy Tsar Cola instead of Pepsi Cola. And this great, one of many moments when this woman named Svetlana leans over to Sarah, the narrator who has come there from America, who was friends with the now deceased we think, Jenny Jones, and Svetlana. I think you have an obsession with Jenny Jones. Obsession, like Calvin Klein.
Right. Like Calvin Klein, yes.
I love that.
I do speak Russian, not fluently.
That's why I was talking. Somebody else, please. Anybody say anything?
Well, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
I have a question about, you talk about doing 40-something drafts and all that. What makes you decide to go?
When it's
When
done.
it's done.
When is it done?
Well, I think that's one of the things I learned in grad school too. And I don't. It's very hard to explain how you know it's done. Part of it is you just can't look at. I mean, to be quite honest with you, do I wish I could change some things in this book? Yes. I'll probably always. That's the way I am. I'm always revising. But I don't know. I think. Oh, maybe Michael can answer this question. But I think part of it is I read a lot of things aloud, like late drafts, and you hear where the rhythm is and the shape of it, and you can kind of hear where the weak spots are. And again, the musicality is very important to me, but I don't write very flowery sentences at all. My writing's pretty bony, actually. But it's precise.
Yeah, and you know, I think it's one of the big questions is the book finished? And I think part of the
So that's why you read it.
trick of it is that as a writer, you have to come to terms with the fact on some given day that this book you've written is really the best version of this book you're capable of writing right now. Which is, on one hand, of course, a relief because it means you're free, but is, on the other hand, a kind of a very difficult moment that you have to survive somehow, because I think almost inevitably, almost by definition, this is how it is as it should be. You had a greater book in mind than what's on the page, right?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's the nature of the organism. We've been walking around with a little cartoon balloon over our head, and in that cartoon balloon is the greatest book anyone has ever written, or at very least, the greatest book we understand ourselves to be capable of writing, that will include everything we know, everything we can imagine, every vestige of soul and intellect and memory that's in us. And even if the book, the day you declare it finished, there's some really good stuff in it, it's not that book.
No, it never will be. But
And you
that's
have
what
to,
makes us
live with that, and you have to say, all right,
And that's why we keep
we
going.
move on.
We
Yeah.
can write something else.
That's why some writers never see the light of day, because they just can't accept. I mean, I've known really gifted writers who simply cannot live with the notion that there's a slightly better book to be written than the book you were
Right.
able to write. And actually, you have to be a little tough. You have to take some aspect of the old showgirl who says, all right.
It's time to let this go. But it does. But I also think it helps to have close readers that you trust, like a few other writer friends, and
Yeah.
that's usually when you sort of feel like, I think this might be done. You hand the manuscript to someone you trust, one of your other writer friends, or whoever you trust as a reader, and if that person's a good reader, and presumably he or she is, if it's one of your trusted readers, then you will hear back from them. I don't know, this scene seems a little thin, or yeah, I don't know, not totally. They're there to give you notes, so.
I mean, I listen to all the people, and I still feel like it should be better.
Right, no, me too. But I mean, in my case, my two sisters are totally amazing readers, and so they read the manuscript a couple of times along the way, and my agent's a really great reader. He read, I don't know. And then it got infinitely better after I sold it to Penguin Press. My editor, Andrea Walker's here, and man, she's good.
Thank
But
you.
I
She
had to
is
give you a
brilliant.
deadline, or you would have kept it.
I know, it's
I had
true.
to say, this is the
It's
cutoff.
true. It's true.
Flip,
It's
yeah,
true. And it's
yeah.
true. She and Bill were like, this is great. This draft sings. Okay. We're taking it away from you.
Should we have one more question, which we'll
Yeah.
answer briefly and succinctly, and then say goodnight? What do you think?
Well, yeah.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Hi.
So first of all, I don't have much of a voice, but I was in Elliott's class.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So I feel like for all of the Brooklyn College people here, you rock.
Thanks.
And part of me is embarrassed to ask this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Thank you for sharing about the will and about self-doubt. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that moment when at New Year's Eve 2010, or maybe not just that moment. How does one push oneself into that zone of, you know what, oh shit.
I'm sure, thank you, I'm sure people, so just quickly, the question is, could you talk a little more about pushing yourself into that zone, about that New Year's Eve night when you actually say to yourself and believe it, within the year, I will write this book. More about that.
I think there are a couple things going on in my life without getting too confessional. I'd recently gone through a breakup, and I was, really sad about that. But I sort of felt like the other thing is I'm 39, I'm going to be 40 in 6 months, and that's a very arbitrary deadline. Age doesn't matter. One of the things I was saying to Kristen earlier, one of the things I love about the Center for Fiction is that the first novel prize is not tied to age. Some of these other first book prizes are like you have to be under 35, you have to be under 40. I think writers mature at very different rates, so I think it's wonderful that Ben Fountain won the first novel prize last year for his extraordinary book, Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk. He was 54, and when he won the prize, he said, "I'm a 54-year-old debut novelist," and bravo, I say. It doesn't. The age does not matter. But I was feeling, as I approached my 40th birthday, I really started to feel like this is, again, way too much information. But I was just sort of feeling like, okay, that my life is not the way I thought it was going to be at this age. I never had a, tremendous desire to get married and have kids, but I just sort of always assumed I would, quite frankly. And I just hit this point where I was like, I'm really alone, and the one thing I can count on, and the one thing that I have is my writing. And I have no distractions anymore. I was letting myself, I think, get very distracted by a relationship. And I was like, this is all I've got, and I am going to just go for it. And I just, I had saved up enough money from freelance advertising jobs that I figured out that I could do nothing but write for most of that year. And so I was a crazy person. I mean, Laura knows that I was like I was so single-minded. I don't know. I just was like, that's it, I'm doing it. And I just kept telling myself I could. So the will is a powerful thing. I think it's a very powerful
A
thing.
powerful and a mysterious thing.
It is, but a lot of it is just deciding. I don't know. It's not, I realize it's not like, oh, everyone just decides they're going to write a novel, and next thing they know, they get it published. I mean, I don't mean to minimize it. It's just that I really did feel like I was at a point where I was my own worst enemy. That and I just decided to stop being my own worst enemy. I'm going to finish this thing. And it helped that I had talked about what the book was about with a few trusted readers who were like, that sounds amazing. So I was like, oh, okay, people are intrigued. I should keep working on this thing. I'm not crazy. This is a good idea.
I think other people almost inevitably figure in. There's this
Yes,
romance
you
about the
need to
novelist
have-
as a solitary figure.
No, you
I don't know
need-
anybody who works in
No,
isolation.
you need support. There's so much rejection when you're a writer. You're always getting rejected for something. I mean, even once you're, I just got rejected last week from something. So it's like, you're always getting rejected. So you have to have some kind of unconditional love and support in your life. You have to have some people who believe in you no matter what. And I'm very lucky because I have some really good friends from grad school, and my friend Laura and my sisters who are seriously the most, whenever I don't believe in myself, they're always there to believe in me. And I do the same for them, but I mean, we're very close. I think probably part of, you ask how much is autobiographical. I didn't lose a sister, but I can't really imagine anything worse than losing my sister, so I'm sure part of the emotion in this book is just imagining how awful that would be, because to me that would just be the worst thing in the world. I mean, my sisters are just, I could live with them for the rest of my life. My poor brothers-in-law. They're like, God, you guys really talk on the phone so many times a day. They didn't realize, each of them were like, oh, I didn't actually know I was going to marry 3 whole sisters. That's just the way it goes. So, I don't know. I mean, I know everyone's different, but I think, I don't want to start sounding like an Atlantic article, but I actually don't really think anyone can have it all. But I think, and I don't, men and women, but I do think there's a lot to be said for just really looking, and I'm going to start sounding like a self-help book, but you know what? Sometimes there's a lot of wisdom there. Looking deep into yourself and figuring out like what you really care about the most, and then pushing the other stuff aside. And I basically like turned down all these social invitations, and I mean, I just was like, that's it. This is the year that I'm not doing anything but working on this book. And these guys know because they didn't see me for a year. I was a total hermit, pretty much. But sometimes you have to do that. So I don't regret it. Although it's nice to be out in the world again. Until I go back in the cave and write the next thing. Yeah.
Elliott, I hope this has been fun for you. It's been fun for
Yes.
everybody. It can't have been more fun for you than it has been for me. I mean, I love teaching. In all of its, most of its aspects. And, to see somebody with a gift and marshalable will do this, actually bring it all the way to fruition, is just, I can't tell you what a thrill it is.
Don't you feel like a father bride giving your daughter away?
Yeah. I certainly had to marry.
I do.
I'm proud of you.
I do want to be a novelist. Can I write another one, please?
Yes. Thank you, everybody.